That morning, I was up at 4:30 a.m. to get ready for my husband's family's trip to Cancun. Outside, it was still pitch black, and the early winter Chicago wind whistled through the window frames with a bitter chill. But inside the house, the sounds of suitcases being dragged across the floor were already echoing. Helen, my mother-in-law, called up from the kitchen. "Sarah, where's my blood pressure medication?" I rushed downstairs, pulled the pills from my purse to give to her, then hurried back up to our room to double-check our documents one last time. This trip had been in the works for over 2 months. My in-laws, David and Helen, had spent their whole lives in a small town in Ohio before moving to the city to live with us. They'd never been out of the country, so my husband, Michael, wanted to take the whole family on a vacation to celebrate a huge contract his company had just landed. He wanted them to see a bit of the world. It was Michael who was paying for everything: the flights, the hotel, the food. He'd said something that I still remember to this day. "You never know how long you'll be healthy. As their son, I have to do this for them while I can." Hearing that, my heart went out to my husband, and I poured all my energy into the preparations. From summer clothes and stomach medicine to Tylenol and small packs of tissues, I packed a separate kit for everyone. I even went online the day before to research tips for elderly air travel so I could remind my in-laws what to do. As for the plane tickets, Michael had initially planned to book them himself, but his younger brother, Kevin, jumped in, claiming he had a friend at a travel agency who could get a much cheaper group rate. The moment Helen heard that, she nodded enthusiastically. "He's family. If you can't trust him, who can you trust?" So, Michael transferred over $10,000 to Kevin to handle everything. In the days leading up to the trip, I felt a little uneasy because Kevin only sent a blurry screenshot of the booking code instead of the full passenger itinerary. But every time I asked, he'd just laugh it off. "Sarah, you're so meticulous. We're going on vacation, not into battle." Seeing my concern, Michael put his arm around my shoulder and whispered, "Hey, don't worry about it. I'm here." His words put me at ease. At 7:00 a.m., the whole family piled into a van and headed to O'Hare. Kevin walked ahead, pushing 2 large suitcases, while his wife, Jessica, live-streamed the whole thing, showing off the family's first trip to Mexico. Helen was wearing a brand new, crimson pantsuit, her face beaming with excitement. David just kept smiling, occasionally turning to me to ask, "Is it going to be cold in Cancun, Sarah?" Seeing them so happy, I felt a genuine sense of joy. When we got to the check-in counter, I opened my bag to get our passports for the agent, but suddenly, a familiar female voice sounded from behind me. "Helen, can I leave my suitcase here?" I spun around. Chloe. She was wearing a form-fitting white dress, her hair in soft waves, her lips a fiery red. She was pulling a gleaming, high-end suitcase. What left me even more stunned was that the moment Helen saw Chloe, she broke into a wide smile and walked over, pulling Chloe by the arm to stand right beside her, as if she were part of the family. My heart started pounding. Before I could even process what was happening, Helen turned to look at me, her eyes as cold as ice. "You can go home now." I was bewildered. "What?" She smirked. "There's no ticket for you." My ears rang as if someone had just slapped me across the head. I thought I had misheard, so I turned to Michael. His face was just as stunned as mine. "What are you talking about, Mom?" he asked, his brow furrowed. Helen replied nonchalantly, "I swapped Sarah's ticket for Chloe's. It's more fitting for someone like her to come with us. Sarah would just be a burden." The air around us fell silent. I stood frozen, the passports in my hand trembling uncontrollably. Michael whipped his head toward his brother. "Kevin, what is this?" Kevin immediately looked down at the floor. I was just doing what Mom told me to do." Jessica, standing next to him, quickly averted her eyes from mine. Only Chloe maintained her gentle, fabricated smile. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, Michael." "A misunderstanding?" I let out a bitter laugh. "What kind of misunderstanding gets my ticket cancelled for this trip?" It was then that David stepped forward, his voice thick with annoyance. "All right, that's enough. Why are you making a scene in the middle of the airport? We're already here. Sarah, just take a taxi home. The rest of us will go." I turned to look at my husband. I knew what his entire family was thinking at that moment. We're already at the airport, so Michael wouldn't dare make a scene. He was a devoted son with a strong sense of pride. He would surely swallow his anger to keep the peace. But right at that moment, Michael suddenly snatched the stack of passports from Kevin's hand. He looked straight at his mother, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. "Cancel it." Helen froze. "What did you say?" "Cancel everything," Michael repeated through gritted teeth. We're all going home. Nobody is going anywhere. The entire family stood there in stunned silence. Chloe's face went pale, Kevin's jaw dropped, and Jessica was so shocked she dropped her phone on the floor. And me? For the first time in all my years as a daughter-in-law, I realized that the man standing beside me didn't just love me with words. He was truly willing to stand in front of me as a shield when his entire family had turned their backs on me. But to understand why Michael's words at the airport that day left his family so utterly speechless, you'd have to go back to the early years of our marriage, which began not with wealth, but with shared meals of ramen noodles in a studio apartment that wasn't even 200 square feet. Michael didn't come from money. His parents, David and Helen, used to run a small booth at a flea market. On a good day, they were happy. On a slow day, the whole family would sigh and look at each other in despair. There were years when business was so bad that they had to take out new loans just to pay off old ones. In that house, poverty wasn't just in the simple meals. It was in the constant, anxious look in their eyes, always afraid of debt collectors showing up at the door. I didn't marry Michael for what he had. Back then, he was just a young man working at a small machine shop, his monthly salary barely enough to get by. But he had one thing that made me believe in him, his character. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't waste his time. After work, he came straight home. Whatever money he made, he'd give some to his mother and save a little to take night classes, learning more about his trade and management, hoping to open his own shop one day. The day I brought Michael home to meet my parents, my mother asked me quietly, "Are you sure about this, honey? His family is really struggling." I just smiled and said, "I'm not afraid of being poor, Mom. I'm afraid of marrying someone who isn't willing to try." At that moment, I believed I had chosen the right man. And truly, during those first few years of our marriage, Michael never disappointed me. We rented a small apartment in a deep, narrow alley. In the summer, it was so hot that the fan running all night couldn't beat the oppressive heat. During the rainy season, water would drip from the tin roof into a plastic bucket we kept in the corner. I sold crafts on Etsy, while he worked at the shop during the day and took on extra repair jobs for neighbors at night. Some nights, we'd be packing orders until almost 1 in the morning, exhausted but still able to look at each other and laugh. He used to say, "A little hardship is fine, as long as we're both pulling in the same direction." I never looked down on his family for being poor. In fact, I felt for David and Helen, thinking of how hard they had worked their whole lives. Whenever we had a slightly better month, I'd send Helen some money for her arthritis medication or buy David a new shirt. Sometimes I'd help with their utility bills. During those times, Helen was so sweet. She'd hold my hand and tell the neighbors, "We're so blessed to have a daughter-in-law like Sarah." I used to believe those words were true. I used to think that as long as I was a good person, respectful and kind, my in-laws would love me like their own. But people can change so quickly, especially when money starts to appear on the horizon. About 2 years after we got married, Michael went into business for himself. At first, it was just a small shop, with a few old colleagues who trusted him enough to follow him. He was a solid businessman, a man of his word. He never took on jobs he couldn't handle or overpromised. As a result, his client base grew. And while he wasn't exactly rich, he was making enough for my in-laws to finally hold their heads high among their relatives. That's when Helen's tone started to change. Before, she used to say, "You two just try to get by." Later, she started saying, "My Michael is different now. With his drive, he's going to go far." As for David, he would brag to anyone who would listen that his son was about to become a big-shot business owner, ready to step into the world of legitimate enterprise. The memory of their poverty hadn't faded, but their sense of pride was growing at an alarming rate. Then Chloe appeared. She was the daughter of Mr. Sterling, a man with money and connections who supplied materials to many large workshops. During a business luncheon, Mr. Sterling took notice of Michael, impressed by his youth, competence, and mature demeanor. Chloe, however, made no secret of the fact that she had known Michael when they were younger. Apparently, she'd had a crush on him back then, because he was tall, good-looking, and had a calm demeanor, unlike the rowdy boys around her. At first, I thought it was just business talk, people in business meeting, exchanging a few compliments. It was normal. But gradually, the look in Helen's eyes when she mentioned Chloe made me uneasy. She'd say, "That girl is rich but not arrogant, and she's so considerate. That's the kind of woman who can elevate a man." David was more direct. If Michael had a father-in-law like Sterling backing him, his life would have been on a different track long ago. I heard those words and felt a knot form in my stomach. A different track? Did the years I spent struggling with Michael, paying off debts with him, and building everything from the ground up not count as part of his life? Once, during dinner, Helen dropped a comment as if it were nothing. A capable man needs to marry someone who can lift him up. A good wife isn't always as valuable as a well-connected one. I put my bowl down, a lump in my throat. Michael looked at his mother for a long moment and then said slowly, "Mom, I married Sarah. I didn't marry someone's wallet." His words warmed my heart, but from that day on, I noticed the way Helen looked at me was different. It was no longer the look of a mother-in-law for the daughter-in-law who had weathered tough times with the family. It was the look of someone staring at an obstacle blocking her family's path to a new life. After Michael's declaration that day, I thought things would settle down, maybe just remain a few pointed remarks during family dinners. I thought Helen's resentment would eventually fade, and David's regret over a missed business opportunity would pass. After all, my marriage to Michael wasn't a piece of clothing you could just change when you felt like it. But I was wrong. Some people, when they see a path to a different life laid out before them, are willing to cast aside years of shared history and affection as if they were nothing. Chloe started showing up more frequently at my in-laws' small storefront. At first, she always used work as an excuse. Sometimes she'd say she was just passing by and wanted to drop off a price quote for Michael. Other times, she'd claim her father asked her to bring some documents for David to look over. But the strange thing was, she always chose times when I wasn't there, or when Michael was out on a delivery, leaving only Helen, David, Kevin, and Jessica at home. She was an expert at winning over older people. Seeing Helen, she would greet her warmly. "Hello, Mrs. H. You're looking even healthier than last time." With David, she would be gentle. "Hello, Mr. D. My father talks about you all the time. He says a man with your integrity is the only kind of person you can trust for a long-term business relationship." On the surface, those words seemed normal, but to people like David and Helen, who had spent their whole lives feeling overlooked, they were sweeter than honey. The first gift Chloe gave Helen was a silk scarf in a jade green color. One look and I could tell it wasn't cheap. The fabric was soft, the box was elegant, and inside was a handwritten card. At first, Helen feigned reluctance. "Oh, you shouldn't have, dear. I'm an old woman, what would I do with something like this?" But even as she said it, her hands kept stroking the scarf, her eyes lighting up with undisguised delight. Chloe smiled. "Please, accept it. It makes me happy. I thought this color would suit you perfectly. Elegant, but not flashy." From that scarf, things began to slide downhill very quickly. A week later, she sent David several boxes of imported health supplements, saying they were good for his liver and joints. Then came a bottle of perfume for Jessica and a watch for Kevin. At first, Kevin scratched his head and said, "Chloe, this is too expensive. I can't accept this." But Jessica, standing beside him, was quick to interject. "When someone is being generous, you accept it. It's not like you asked for it. Besides, our families will be doing business together for a long time." I heard that and my heart sank. One gift could be a social courtesy. Two could be a sign of fondness. But gift after gift, each one perfectly chosen for the recipient, accompanied by the exact words each person wanted to hear, that was no longer a coincidence. That was calculation. Once, I went to my in-laws' house to pick up some paperwork for Michael and happened to see Helen hastily shoving a gift box into a dresser drawer. I asked gently, "Mom, who sent you a gift?" She jumped, and her face immediately darkened. "Are you a daughter-in-law or a spy? I don't need to report to you every time I receive something from someone." I stood frozen at the doorway, feeling both sad and humiliated. Before, whenever I bought her medicine, a new shirt, or a scarf, she would accept it so naturally. But now, a gift from an outsider was hidden away like a treasure, and my simple question was twisted into an accusation of snooping. Chloe became more and more open. She didn't just stop by the shop, she started sending food over to the house. One day it was a box of fancy pastries, the next a gourmet gift basket, and another day, imported fruit. She would text Helen privately, asking, "Mrs. H, do you like your food spicy or mild? Is there anything Mr. D can't eat? I want to make sure I get it right next time." Helen read those messages in front of me, letting out an intentional sigh. See? A girl from a wealthy family, yet so considerate. Some people can be a daughter-in-law for years and still not be this thoughtful. I gave a faint, humorless smile, and didn't reply. I had no desire to compete with a girl who was using gifts to buy my husband's family. But Helen didn't stop. One day at dinner, she said bluntly, "Some people are rich and considerate, while some daughters-in-law just spend all their time clinging to their husbands, as if they're afraid someone will steal him away." I put my fork down and looked at her. Michael immediately squeezed my hand under the table, as if to comfort me. He had returned Chloe's gifts many times. Once, I saw him place a whole bag of gifts on the reception table, his voice calm but firm. "Chloe, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm married. Please don't send gifts to my family anymore. It creates misunderstandings." Chloe, at that time, still smiled softly. "I just admire your parents, Michael." "You're overthinking it." Michael replied instantly. "I'm not overthinking. I just don't want my wife to be put in an uncomfortable position over things that shouldn't be an issue. But someone like Chloe doesn't give up easily." In front of Michael, she was demure and polite, her words as soft as the wind. Behind his back, she would cry to Helen, saying she only admired him, that she felt sorry for him because he had so much talent but lacked the right person to support him. Hearing this, Helen defended her even more fiercely. She told me, "Chloe has a good heart, not like some people who always have a cold face, thinking that just because they're the wife, they can look down on everyone." David was more pragmatic. One afternoon, I overheard him talking to Helen on the porch. "Think about it. If Michael marries that girl, our family struggles are over. Our debts will be taken care of, the shop will have capital to expand, and Kevin will benefit too. Sarah is a good person, that's true. But does being good make our family rich?" I stood behind the door, my hands ice cold. It was at that moment that I understood. I was no longer dealing with a few gifts or some cutting comparisons. This was a slow, methodical siege. Chloe was using money to buy the loyalty of each person in my husband's family, and they were willingly opening the door for her, just waiting for the day to push me out. Ever since I overheard David's words on the porch, a crack had formed in my heart. I didn't tell Michael right away, not because I wanted to hide it from him, but because I was afraid of hurting him. What pain could be worse than knowing your own parents are calculating your life as if it were a commodity to be traded? I kept thinking that as long as my husband and I stood firm, all the gossip and pressure would eventually die down. But I forgot that once greed is fed with gifts and promises, it doesn't stop so easily. One evening, Helen called Michael, her voice unusually sweet. "The two of you should come over for dinner tonight. I'm making some of your favorite dishes." Michael glanced at me as soon as he heard her. He knew that these sudden dinner invitations were rarely simple. Initially, she had only asked him to come alone, saying she and David needed to talk to their son privately. But I saw the evasive look in his eyes and a sense of foreboding washed over me. I whispered, "I'm coming with you." He took my hand and nodded. "Yes. We're married. We go together." The dinner that night was quite lavish. There was a slow-cooked pot roast, creamy mashed potatoes with gravy, and a classic green bean casserole, all of Michael's favorites. But the atmosphere was so heavy that my hand felt stiff just holding my fork. Helen placed a piece of meat on Michael's plate, sighing as if it were an afterthought. "That sweet girl Chloe stopped by to see me again today. She's such a good person. So wealthy, but not arrogant at all, and so devoted to you." Michael immediately put his fork down. His voice wasn't loud, but it was very clear. "Mom, please don't talk about that in front of my wife." Helen froze for a second, then gave a forced laugh. "What did I say? Why are you so tense?" "I just think she's a nice girl, so I complimented her." It was then that David cleared his throat and set his glass of whiskey on the table. He looked at Michael with a strange expression, no longer the look of a father advising his son, but more like someone calculating profit and loss. "Michael, let me be honest. A man who wants to make it big has to think long term. A strong support system is crucial. You have talent, but talent alone isn't enough." I lowered my eyes to my plate. Every word from David felt like a piece of ice dropping into my heart. Kevin, sitting beside him, chimed in. "He's right, bro. If you had Mr. Sterling backing you, you could open another shop, buy more machinery, and sign big contracts whenever you wanted. Mom and Dad would have an easier life, and the whole family would benefit, not just you." Jessica glanced at me and then smirked. "Sarah's great, it's true, but being great doesn't make the whole family rich. In this day and age, love without money is just exhausting." I heard that and a lump formed in my throat. It turned out that all the years I had endured with Michael, all the things we had built together, meant nothing to them. I wanted to say something, but I remained silent. I didn't need to win this argument with them. I just wanted to see if the man beside me would choose to stay silent or stand up. Michael slowly placed his fork on the table. The sound was soft, but the entire table fell silent. He looked at each member of his family, his gaze finally resting on Helen. He spoke for the last time on the matter. "Sarah is my wife. Anyone who says she isn't worthy doesn't need to see my face again. Helen slammed her hand on the table, and the gravy boat in front of her sloshed over the sides. How dare you talk to your mother like that? Ever since you married her, you've changed completely. She must have put a spell on you. Have you forgotten how much your father and I struggled to raise you? An opportunity to change our lives is right in front of you, and you're throwing it away for a woman? Michael shot to his feet. Address my wife with respect, Mom. Helen's voice grew louder. Am I wrong? What does she have that Chloe doesn't? Can her family help you? Can she give you capital? Can she save this family from its debts? All she knows how to do is cling to you to keep her title as your wife. I saw Michael's hands clench so tightly they turned white. I placed my hand on his, gently shaking my head not to stop him from defending me, but to stop him from saying something in his anger that would hurt him even more later. Just then, Helen's phone buzzed with a video call. The screen lit up with Chloe's name. Helen shot me a look and then deliberately answered. Chloe's face appeared, her eyes red and her voice choked with emotion. Helen, are you feeling better? I'm so sorry. Is it because of me that Michael is in a difficult position? She spoke as if she were innocent, but her tears fell at just the right moment, her eyes intentionally glancing toward Michael. Helen's tone immediately softened with pity. It's not your fault, dear. It breaks my heart to see a good person like you not being appreciated. Michael strode over and took the phone from his mother's hand. He looked directly into the screen, his voice so cold that even Chloe was taken aback. Chloe, stop the act. I am not divorcing my wife to become your family's son-in-law. Do you understand? The line went silent. A few seconds later, Chloe lowered her face, her voice trembling. Michael, I just care about you. Your caring is getting my wife insulted, Michael said, enunciating each word. From now on, don't call my mother, don't send gifts to my family, and don't use the pretense of affection to destroy someone else's. He ended the call. The room was suffocatingly quiet. Helen was trembling with rage. She pointed a finger at Michael, her voice cracking. One day, you will regret this. You'll regret choosing this woman. When you have nothing left, don't come crawling back to me. Michael didn't reply. He pulled out my chair and took my hand. Before walking out the door, he turned back and said something so quietly that it silenced the entire house. If having nothing is the price of keeping my integrity, I'll pay it. That night, we left my in-laws' house in silence. The wind outside was cold, but the hand Michael held was warm. I knew that after this dinner, they would no longer scheme in secret. They would oppose us openly, perhaps even more cruelly. And in my heart, I had a clear premonition, the real storm had only just begun. After that dinner, as tense as a drawn bowstring, I thought it would be a long time before my in-laws would call us over again. But just over a week later, Helen unexpectedly called Michael. This time, her voice wasn't sharp or accusatory, and she didn't mention Chloe. She just sighed, sounding as weary as someone who had just recovered from a long illness. Michael, why don't you and Sarah come over for dinner this weekend? There's something I want to talk about. Michael looked at me, his eyes full of suspicion. I wasn't at ease either, but in the end, I nodded. They were his parents, after all. Some relationships, no matter how damaged, still deserve one last chance to see if they can be salvaged. That evening, we went to my in-laws' house. Helen didn't speak in riddles like she usually did. She sat on the sofa, her eyes red, clutching an old handkerchief. The moment she saw Michael, she pulled him down to sit beside her. I've been thinking, son. I'm getting old, and I don't want our family to live with this tension forever. I have a short temper, and if I said anything harsh, it was only because I love you and I worry about your future. Michael was silent, and I sat beside him, not saying a word. Helen glanced at me, and for the first time in days, there was no mockery in her eyes. She continued. Why don't we all go on a trip somewhere, just to clear our heads? I heard from some friends that Mexico is beautiful, and the food is good. I've lived this long and never been out of the country. I just want one chance to travel with my children. Those words hit Michael's softest spot. He was decisive in his professional life, but with his parents, he always had a unique kind of patience. I saw his shoulders slump slightly. Perhaps he was remembering the lean years, when Helen had stood in the rain at the flea market, when David had driven a beat-up truck full of junk to provide for him and his brother. Even though they had changed, the memories of those years were not easily erased. On the way home, Michael asked me quietly, "What do you think?" I looked at him and saw both exhaustion and hope in his eyes. I knew he wasn't hoping for just a vacation. He wanted to believe that, after everything, his parents could still come back to their senses. I sighed and said, "If you think this trip will help ease the tension, then let's try." But you have to remember, reconciliation doesn't mean letting people continue to disrespect you. He squeezed my hand. I know. I'm here. Don't worry. After that, Michael decided to cover the entire cost of the trip. Flights, hotel, transportation, and basic meals were all calculated. He said his parents were older and shouldn't have to worry about money on their first trip abroad. I didn't object. Honestly. If the trip could bring some peace back to the family, the money wasn't something I cared about. But as soon as Michael mentioned booking tickets, Kevin immediately chimed in. He said a friend of his at a travel agency specialized in cheap group packages, and if he handled it, he could save a considerable amount of money. Michael initially said he'd rather book it himself to be sure, but Helen immediately frowned. He's your brother. Don't you trust him? Kevin wants to help out the family. Let him do it so he feels responsible. Kevin grinned. That's right, bro. Just wire me the money, and I'll take care of everything. You have to book group deals fast to get the best price. If you wait, it'll go up. Jessica, sitting next to him, added, Don't worry, Kevin knows the guy. It's not a scam. I don't know why, but Kevin's excessive eagerness made me feel uneasy. That night, as Michael was preparing to transfer the money, I reminded him, ask Kevin to send the full passenger itinerary first. International travel is no small thing, even one wrong letter in a name can be a huge hassle. Michael nodded and called his brother right away. A few moments later, Kevin sent over a screenshot. It showed the total number of tickets, the flight times, and the destination, but the section with the passenger names was half covered by a gray bar. I looked at the image, and my heart grew heavier. I texted him. Why didn't you send the full file so we can check the names? Kevin replied with a laughing emoji, and then called back immediately. His voice was as flippant as ever. Sarah, you're so intense, treating a vacation like a criminal investigation. I'm booking tickets, not doing something shady. Before I could say anything, Helen's voice came through the phone. Sarah, don't make things difficult for him. We just started having some peace. Don't be so suspicious about everything. I fell silent. Michael looked at me and then said to Kevin, just send the full itinerary to me later for review. For now, just hold the spots. Then he transferred the money. That night, as I was packing our suitcases, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. It was a single, short sentence. Sometimes it hurts less not to know, you know? I stared at the message for a long time. When I texted back, Jessica didn't reply. When I called, she declined it. A chilling sensation crept up my spine. But I still had no concrete evidence to tell Michael that something was wrong. The day before we were set to leave, Chloe posted a picture online. It showed a passport, a white suitcase, and a pair of sunglasses laid out neatly. The caption was just one sentence. A special trip. Hope it's all worth it. I looked at the photo, and my heart sank. Mexico, a suitcase, a passport, a special trip. It was all too coincidental to be random. I showed the phone to Michael. He stared at the screen for a few seconds, his expression darkening. But then he put the phone down and pulled me to sit beside him. Let me handle it. Don't wear yourself out before the trip. I didn't say anything more. I just quietly continued packing medication, light jackets, documents, and our passports into a bag. At that time, I didn't know that the trap they had set was nearly complete. They thought that by bringing me to the airport only to discover I had no ticket in front of everyone, I would be so humiliated that I would just retreat. But they never imagined that the very trap they set would become the final test of where Michael truly stood in our marriage. The moment Michael's words, cancel everything. We're all going home. Nobody is going anywhere, rang out. The entire check-in area seemed to fall silent for a few seconds. I stood beside him, still clutching our passports, my palms cold and clammy. The airport announcements continued to drone on, people continued to rush by with their suitcases, but to me, all the sounds seemed to be coming from a great distance. Helen was the first to react. She grabbed Michael's arm, her nails digging into his wrist, her voice tight with fury. Are you out of your mind? All that money, all that preparation, and now you want to cancel when we're already here? Michael pulled his mother's hand off his arm, not forcefully, but with a clear finality. He didn't look at me or at Chloe, he looked directly at Helen. You know exactly why I'm canceling. David, standing nearby, his face flushed with anger, pulled his suitcase toward him and growled. A man who wants to make it big has to know how to sacrifice the small things. It's just one wife. There are plenty of ways to handle it. Why are you making a scene for the whole world to see? The phrase, just one wife, felt like a bucket of ice water thrown in my face. Even though I knew I was no longer valued in their eyes, hearing my own father-in-law say it in the middle of a crowded airport still left me choked with humiliation. Michael turned to David, his voice low, each word seeming to press down on the cold tile floor. My wife is not an object to be replaced whenever someone feels like it, and she is certainly not something to be sacrificed for this family's pride. David was stunned. Helen gasped as if she couldn't believe her son would dare talk back to his father in public. It was then that Chloe stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes at just the right moment. She clutched her purse to her chest, her voice as soft as if it might break. David, Helen, please don't fight. If Sarah is unhappy, I can go home. I don't want to be the cause of any trouble in Michael's family. She spoke so skillfully, every sentence sounding like an apology, but her eyes kept darting toward Michael, hoping he would soften. Before I could even react, Jessica's phone suddenly rang. In her panic, she must have accidentally hit the speakerphone button. Kevin's voice came through, loud and clear. Just let Chloe play the victim. Once you get to Mexico, we'll arrange for her to have the room next to Michael's. A few days of mom putting on the pressure, and he'll cave. Sarah will be at home crying her eyes out until she finally gets the message. The air around us froze solid. Jessica's face turned white as she fumbled to end the call, but it was too late. Chloe stood there, petrified, the gentle smile on her lips cracking like a porcelain mask. Kevin, a few feet away, paled, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. I looked at each of them, and suddenly, I felt a strange sense of calm. My suspicions over the past few days hadn't been paranoid after all. They hadn't just cancelled my ticket. They had orchestrated an entire play to replace me with Chloe. I looked at Kevin and asked slowly. So from the very beginning, my ticket was cancelled to make room for her? Kevin bowed his head, saying nothing. Jessica grabbed her husband's arm, her lips moving but no words coming out. But Helen, far from being ashamed, lifted her chin and pointed a finger right at my face. That's right. So what? Someone like Chloe can actually help this family. She has money, she has connections. What can you offer besides the title of wife? A few people nearby started to turn and stare. Some slowed down, others began whispering to each other. I knew that if I burst into tears or started yelling, they would have even more reason to say I was making a scene. So I just stood there, letting the truth expose them one by one. Michael stepped in front of Chloe. He looked at her, his eyes so cold that she instinctively took a step back. Listen carefully. From now on, stay away from my wife. Chloe burst into tears, reaching out to grab his arm. Michael, I've waited for you for almost 10 years. What am I lacking compared to her? I can help you, I can help your whole family. What can she give you? Michael shook her hand off. He didn't raise his voice, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. You have more money than my wife, but you lack her character. And what I need to build a life with is not your money. Chloe froze. Her face flushing red and then turning deathly pale. Helen, however, was ignited by his words. She lunged forward, her hand raised. I only saw a blur as her hand swung down. A sharp slap echoed through the terminal. My cheek burned, my head snapped to the side. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. Helen shrieked, her voice breaking with rage. It's your fault. It's all your fault that my son is throwing away his chance to change our lives. Why do you cling to him? Do you want this whole family to die poor with you? I gently touched my stinging cheek, and my heart turned completely cold. That slap wasn't just on my face, it shattered the last shred of hope that she still saw me as a human being. Michael immediately pulled me behind him, his eyes blazing, his shoulders trembling with anger. For the first time since I became his wife, I heard him yell at his mother with a voice so full of pain it was terrifying. Mom, if you touch my wife one more time, I swear we are done. Helen fell silent. David was speechless. Kevin didn't dare look up. Jessica clutched her phone and stood off to the side. And Chloe looked at Michael as if she couldn't believe the man she wanted so badly could turn his back on everyone for me. I stood behind my husband, my cheeks still burning, but my mind was clearer than ever. The flight hadn't even taken off, but my in-laws had already ripped off their final masks right there in the middle of a crowded airport. After the slap at the airport, no one had the nerve to continue with the trip. Michael did exactly as he had said. He walked straight to the airline counter and requested to cancel all the tickets that were refundable. The non-refundable ones, he accepted as a loss. Helen stood behind him, trembling with a mixture of anger and shock, muttering under her breath, "My God, my money, my trip, my reputation." Hearing that, I could only laugh bitterly. From start to finish, the money was Michael's. The preparation was mine, but the only thing she truly cared about was her own reputation. The family dragged their suitcases back to the taxi stand in a cloud of undeniable humiliation. Kevin kept his head down. Jessica clutched her phone in silence. Chloe was picked up by a private driver. Before getting into the car, she looked back at Michael, her eyes filled with a mixture of resentment and defiance. But Michael didn't even glance at her. He just opened the car door for me and sat beside me for the entire ride home. In the car, Helen started to cry. At first, it was quiet sobs, but they soon escalated into loud wails. Through her tears, she began listing her grievances. I gave birth to him, raised him, fed him, sent him to school. And now, for a woman, he dares to yell at his own mother in public. At this point, she whipped her head toward me, her eyes bloodshot. Are you happy now? You've ruined the whole family's trip. You're nothing but a homewrecker. I didn't respond. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, all the pent-up frustration would erupt into words I couldn't take back. Michael squeezed my hand, a silent signal for me to let him handle it. But David wouldn't let it go. He slammed his hand against the car door, the sharp sound making Jessica jump. If it weren't for this woman today, our family would be on a plane to Cancun right now. You're completely wrapped around her finger, Michael. Michael turned to his father, his voice hoarse but clear. Without Sarah, I would have been the most despicable man at that airport today. David snorted. So noble. Let's see if your nobility can feed this family. It was then that Kevin finally spoke up, his voice laced with bitterness over the lost vacation. You're overreacting, bro. It's not like Sarah would have died if she went home alone. It was just a few days. Why did you have to make such a big deal out of it? I turned to look at him, the brother-in-law who had taken his brother's money, who had hidden my name from the passenger list, now talking as if I were the one who had started the trouble. I asked him quietly, if the person whose ticket was cancelled was your wife, would you be taking it so lightly? Kevin was speechless for a moment before looking away. Jessica, seeing the tension, feigned a sigh. Come on, everyone, just give a little. Maybe, Sarah, you could try to compromise a bit. You hold on to Michael so tightly, it makes his parents worry. Her words sounded like an attempt at mediation, but every syllable was designed to shift the blame onto me. I looked at Jessica and replied coldly. I'm not holding on to anyone. If someone wants to leave, you can't lock them in. If someone wants to stay, you don't need to hold them. She fell silent. By the time the car reached my in-laws' house, it was almost noon. I thought the drama would pause there, that everyone would retreat to their rooms to cool down. But as soon as we got out of the car, I saw Chloe standing in front of the gate. She had changed into a different dress, and was holding several large gift bags. Her makeup was subtle, but her eyes were still red, as if she had just been crying. The moment she saw Helen, she rushed forward and, in a dramatic display, burst into tears, clinging to the older woman. Helen, I'm so sorry. It's my fault the family had a bad day. Please don't be angry with Michael, and please don't be sad because of me. Helen reacted as if she had found her long-lost daughter, rushing to comfort her and pulling her into an embrace. Oh, you poor thing. It's not your fault at all. A well-mannered girl like you knows how to apologize, unlike some people who ruin everything and still act like nothing happened. With that, she turned and pointed a finger at me. See? That's the difference between you and her. I watched the scene unfold and no longer felt pain, only a wave of nausea. A person who had just conspired with them to humiliate me at the airport was now putting on a show, playing the role of the gentle victim. And the most frightening part was that my in-laws weren't ignorant. They knew everything, yet they still chose to embrace her because she had what they wanted. Just then, a black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. A driver got out and opened the door for a middle-aged man in a gray suit. His hair was slicked back, and he carried himself with an air of authority. I recognized him immediately, Mr. Sterling, Chloe's father. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He walked into the living room, placed a leather briefcase on the table, and looked directly at Michael. I heard what happened at the airport. I don't blame you. It's common for a man to be held back by sentiment. He glanced at me briefly, his eyes filled with unconcealed disdain. But if you were single, I would be willing to fund you to start your own company. Not the small shop you have now, but a real corporation. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. David's eyes lit up. Helen stopped crying. Kevin sat up straight. Only I felt a chill run down my spine. It turned out they weren't ashamed of what happened at the airport at all. They were just disappointed that their little play hadn't reached the final act where they collected their reward. David turned to Michael, his voice urgent. Did you hear that? You'll never get a second chance like this in your entire life. He's being so generous. What are you still holding on to? Michael looked at his father for a long time, then said slowly, "I'm not selling my wife for money." Mr. Sterling let out a faint, dismissive laugh that made my skin crawl. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick file, and threw it onto the glass coffee table. "A shame. But I'm sure your wife doesn't know about this." The file slid to a stop in front of me. I looked down, and the words seemed to stab at my eyes. Loan agreements, extension notices, collateral documents. The total amount was over $250,000. I froze. $250,000. Michael had never told me his family was in that much debt. Helen immediately burst into tears, this time a truly frantic wail. "This family is about to lose the house. Sarah, only Chloe can save us now. If you have any compassion for me, please, let Michael go." I looked at her, my heart growing colder by the second. It was only then that I understood. Their desperation to have Michael leave me wasn't just about greed or a preference for Chloe. His entire family was on the verge of bankruptcy, and they had decided to use our marriage as the price to pay off their debts. Michael stood silently before the file. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the real tragedy didn't begin at the airport. It had been calculated long ago, and it was only now revealing its true, ugly face to me. That night, Michael didn't sleep. From the moment Mr. Sterling left, he barely said a word. He just sat on the balcony, his back against the wall, smoking one cigarette after another. Since we got married, I had rarely seen him smoke. He'd once told me he quit because the smell bothered me. But that night, the smoke curled around him on the balcony like a heavy fog, weighing him down. I watched his silent figure from inside the room, my heart aching as if it were being squeezed. I knew he was trapped. On one side was his family, a debt of over $250,000, and the house they could lose at any moment. On the other side was me, the marriage he had fought so fiercely to protect at the airport. To outsiders, he seemed so strong. But I knew that inside, he was likely falling apart. Near dawn, I went to the kitchen to get him a glass of warm water. As I passed my in-laws' room, I overheard David's voice, quiet but sharp. "Don't you go soft on him. As soon as Michael marries Chloe, Sterling will wipe the debt clean. And not just the $250,000 he promised to invest in the shop too. If we lose this chance, we're all out on the street." I froze. My hand gripping the glass so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Helen's voice followed, colder than I could have imagined. "I know. But Michael is being stubborn, and that Sarah won't let him go. If he won't divorce her, we have to make her leave on her own." David grunted. "Do whatever you have to do. You're his mother, you know how he thinks. Don't let one daughter-in-law ruin everything for this family." I stood motionless in the hallway. The water in my glass had grown cold, but I felt even colder. So, even after everything that had happened, after the public slap, after Michael's threat to cut ties, they felt no remorse. They were just plotting a new way to force me out. In their eyes, I had never been a daughter-in-law, nor the wife of their son. I was just an obstacle that needed to be removed. The next morning, Michael went to the shop as usual. Before he left, he smoothed my hair back, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Stay home and rest today. Let me handle things." I nodded, but my heart was unsettled. Around noon, Jessica sent me a picture with several exclamation points. It showed Chloe at Michael's office, holding a container of food, leaning slightly toward him. The angle was cleverly chosen, making them look intimate. Less than 10 minutes later, Chloe's post appeared on social media. She posted the same picture with the caption, "Sometimes you don't know what you're missing until it's gone." Below, a few of my in-laws' acquaintances started leaving vague comments. One asked, "Is there good news coming soon?" Another praised, "You two look great together." Someone else wrote, "A successful man ultimately has to choose a partner on his level." I stared at the screen, my heart aching, but I didn't cry. I knew if I reacted, they would accuse me of being jealous, petty, and devaluing myself. Just then, Jessica called, her voice feigning concern. "Sarah, did you see the post? Honestly, you should be careful. When a man is backed into a corner financially, his resolve can weaken. And Chloe isn't exactly a pushover. She has both money and looks." I replied coldly, "Are you worried about me, or are you helping them push me off a cliff?" The line went silent for a few seconds before Jessica gave a forced laugh. "You're so sensitive. I was just giving you a heads up." I hung up. After that call, I couldn't sit still anymore. I opened my laptop and logged into our shared bank account to check recent expenses. No money was missing. But I did find something strange. In the archived emails, there were multiple requests from Kevin asking Michael to scan company documents for a partner proposal. Some of these files were sent at very late hours, a time when Michael was usually fast asleep after a long day at the shop. A bad feeling crept over me. I searched through an old drawer in his home office, one he rarely used, filled with scrap paper, old quotes, and unused contracts. Beneath a stack of old documents, I found an unsigned investment agreement between Mr. Sterling's company and Michael's shop. At first, I thought it was a normal draft, but when I flipped to the last page, my entire body went cold. An additional clause was written in clear, stark terms. Both parties shall proceed toward a familial relationship to ensure a long-term and stable business partnership. I read that line over and over. I hadn't misunderstood. Mr. Sterling didn't just want to help Michael. He was using money to buy a son-in-law, to buy the loyalty of my entire family, and to buy the right to steamroll my marriage. What they called a business partnership was, in reality, a transaction wrapped in pretty words. That evening, Michael came home looking exhausted. I didn't confront him about Chloe's picture or ask why she was at his shop. I just quietly placed the contract on the table in front of him. "Read this." He opened it, his expression calm at first, but as he read further, his face darkened. When he reached the familial relationship clause, his hands started to shake. He shot to his feet and slammed his fist into the wall. A dull thud echoed through the room. Blood seeped from his knuckles, a stark red against the white paint. "They dared," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "They dared to trade his marriage." I rushed over to grab his hand. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. He was no longer the defiant man who had cancelled a vacation at the airport. In front of me was just a son who had realized his own parents had secretly sold his life. And in that very moment, I understood that this fight was no longer just about protecting my place as his wife. It was about pulling Michael out of the trap his own family had set for him. The next morning, Michael took the contract to his parents' house. He didn't want to argue over the phone, and he didn't want me to endure any more insults. But I went with him. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I knew that when people are cornered, they'll grab onto anything to drag others down with them. The moment David saw the contract on the table, he knew he'd been caught. His face darkened, but within seconds, his embarrassment vanished, replaced by a shocking shamelessness. He picked up the papers, threw them on the floor, and yelled, "So what? I did it for you, for this family. If you don't marry Chloe, then you can go pay back that $250,000 yourself." Helen, sitting beside him, immediately burst into tears. "Oh, my life is so hard. I gave birth to him, raised him, and now he's turning on his own parents for his wife." She clutched her chest and slumped back onto the sofa as if she were about to faint. But this time, I wasn't fooled. I saw her peek to see if Michael was rushing over to help her. Michael stood perfectly still, looking at his parents with more pain than anger. "I'd rather pay it myself than sell my wife." As soon as he said that, Kevin let out a smirk. He stood by the door, arms crossed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You talk a big game. But what are you going to pay it with? Your company is short on cash flow, and you're 2 weeks behind on payroll. If Mr. Sterling pulls his support, you'll be bankrupt before you know it." I glanced at Michael. He didn't deny it, and that sent a pang through my heart. He had been hiding the pressure from the business from me, probably to spare me more worry. But his silence was now being used as a weapon against him by his own family. Helen was still moaning on the sofa, repeating over and over, "Son, listen to me. A divorce won't kill you. Just save the family first." The air in that room felt like a sealed pressure cooker. Every word was scalding, every look a dagger. Michael didn't argue further. He just bent down, picked up the contract, folded it neatly, and took my hand to leave. Before we walked out the door, David threw one last sentence at us: "Go ahead, try to defy Mr. Sterling. Without him, you're nothing." It didn't take long for those words to come true. That afternoon, just as Michael got back to the shop, a major client called to cancel their contract. It was an order he had been preparing for nearly a month. The materials were already purchased, the workers assigned to shifts. The guy on the phone was polite. "Sorry, Michael. We've had a change of plans and won't be moving forward with the partnership for now." Michael asked for a reason, but they were evasive. Less than an hour later, the news had spread through the shop. A few workers whispered that Mr. Sterling must have pulled some strings. Someone said they saw Sterling's assistant calling that client. Another said it plainly. "Looks like the boss crossed a rich guy. I just hope we still have jobs." Michael heard it all, but didn't say a word. He just stood in the middle of the shop, staring at the piles of raw materials in the warehouse, his eyes dark. That night, he didn't sleep again. I woke up around 3 a.m. to find him at his desk, staring at a spreadsheet of costs, payroll, materials, and short-term loans. The blue light of the screen illuminated a face so gaunt it was painful to look at. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't turn around, just said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry. I thought I could handle this on my own." I wrapped my arms around him from behind and said softly, "We're a team. We handle things together. Don't shut me out." He gripped my hand tightly, but I could feel how cold it was. 3 days later, Chloe appeared at the shop. She came alone, not as elaborately dressed as usual, but still radiating the confidence of someone holding all the cards. I arrived just as she was walking into Michael's office. The door was slightly ajar, so I could hear every word from the hallway. Chloe placed a file on his desk, her voice deceptively gentle. "Michael, I don't want to see you suffer like this. This is a new contract. It's enough to cover your payroll, save the shop, and give you operating capital. My father is still willing to give you a chance." Michael didn't answer. She continued, her voice softer but as sharp as a knife. "All you have to do is sign the divorce papers, and this will all be over." I stood outside the door, my heart pounding, but I didn't go in. I wanted to hear my husband's answer when I wasn't there. A long silence followed. Then I heard the sound of paper being torn one sheet, then another, then the entire file ripped in half and thrown onto the desk. Michael's voice rang out, hoarse but solid as steel. "I can go bankrupt, but I won't be a coward." The door flew open. Chloe stumbled back, her face flushed with rage. When she saw me standing there, she lost all control. "Are you happy now? You want to drag him down into the mud with you, don't you?" She pointed at me, her voice trembling with resentment. "Michael, do you really think she loves you? Without your money, without your company, she'll leave you too." I stepped into the room, so calm it surprised even me. "I married him when he had nothing. The one who loves money is you." That remark hit her where it hurt most. She lunged forward, raising her hand to slap me, but Michael was faster. He caught her wrist and pulled me behind him. "That's enough," he growled. "Get out of my shop." Chloe looked at him, her eyes red with either tears or hatred. She wrenched her hand away and laughed coldly. "You'll come back begging me. And when you do, don't blame me for not giving you a chance." That evening, before we could recover from the confrontation, Michael received a text from a business acquaintance. It was a single line, but it made us both freeze. "Mr. Sterling was just taken in for questioning by the Economic Crimes Unit. Something about money flows through a few shell corporations." I looked at Michael, and he looked at me. In the quiet of the room, we both knew another door had just opened. And behind that door was a truth far bigger than a rich girl trying to steal someone else's husband. News that Mr. Sterling had been brought in for questioning by the authorities spread like wildfire. Overnight, the people who had once flocked around him fell silent. The phone calls that he once only had to make once to get an answer now went to voicemail or rang endlessly. The powerful safety net my in-laws had been counting on suddenly looked like a sinking ship. Helen was the most panicked. She called Chloe over and over. "Chloe, honey, please pick up. It's Helen. What happened to your father? And what about our debt?" But the other end was just a long, cold ringtone. Calls on messaging apps went unanswered, texts were left unread. Helen was so furious she threw her phone on the sofa and clutched her head, muttering, "This can't be happening. They're too rich for this to happen." David didn't yell. He just sat silently in his chair, his face ashen. I looked at him and understood that his fear wasn't about Mr. Sterling's trouble, but the possibility that if Sterling went down, the $250,000 debt and all the paperwork signed between them would be dragged into the light. For a man so obsessed with his pride, the greatest fear wasn't poverty, but being exposed as both poor and greedy. Kevin had lost his arrogant swagger. He paced the living room, running his hands through his hair and kicking the leg of the coffee table. "I told you not to push Michael so hard. You and Dad just had to listen to them. Now, look what's happened. If Sterling is really under investigation, what about the money they transferred to my account?" Helen whipped around and snapped. "You shut up. You didn't seem to have a problem when you were taking Chloe's money, did you?" Kevin's face flushed red, and he fell silent. For the first time, I saw that they were no longer a united front. Greed had bound them together, but fear was tearing them apart. I thought the shock of that night was enough, but the next morning, Michael revealed something that left me truly stunned. As I was making coffee, he walked into the office holding a small, black USB drive. He placed it on the desk in front of me and was silent for a long time before finally saying, "I'm sorry I kept this from you." My heart sank. "What is it now, Michael?" He pulled up a chair and sat across from me. After several sleepless nights, his face was gaunt, but his eyes were unusually clear. He spoke slowly, as if each word required a great deal of courage. "The truth is, I've been quietly investigating Mr. Sterling for months." I froze. He plugged the USB into the laptop. The screen filled with neatly labeled folders: fake contracts, money trail, recorded calls, airport plan. He explained that Mr. Sterling wasn't just a wealthy partner looking to marry off his daughter. Since he first approached Michael's shop, he had repeatedly suggested signing material contracts with unusually high values, with payments routed through several unfamiliar companies. At first, Michael thought it was just how well-connected people did business, but the more he looked into it, the more something felt wrong. Several companies were registered under other people's names but were actually controlled by Sterling. The contracts said they were for goods, Michael explained, but the shipments were never full, and the money was funneled back to various personal accounts. I think he was using fake contracts to launder money. A chill ran down my spine. So, Mr. Sterling didn't just want Michael as a son-in-law, he needed someone with a clean reputation, a real manufacturing business, and genuine competence to serve as the perfect cover. Someone like Michael, not wealthy, but reputable, with a legitimate shop and clear business records, was the perfect pawn. Michael looked at me, his voice growing hoarse. I knew I was being targeted to be a respectable front, which is why I always kept my distance from Chloe. But I didn't tell you everything because I didn't want you to worry. I thought I could handle it myself, save the company, and find a way to pay off my parents' debt without blowing everything up. He paused, his hands clenching into fists. But at the airport that day, when they dared to cancel your ticket, when they let you be humiliated in front of all those people, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I didn't know whether to be angry or to feel for him. A part of me was hurt that he had hidden so much from me for so long. But looking at the folders on the USB drive, I understood the magnitude of the trap he had been caught in. He had been fighting Mr. Sterling, resisting pressure from his own family, and trying to shield me from it all at the same time. Michael opened an audio file. Mr. Sterling's deep voice filled the room. "Your son just has to marry my daughter. I'll handle the rest. Your debt, capital for the shop, even that storefront your other son wants to open, I'll take care of it." Then came David's voice, lower but crystal clear. "As long as this family is saved, changing a wife is worth it. Sarah is a good person, but she can't save us." I sat there, stunned. Even though I had prepared myself, hearing David say those words himself still felt like a punch to the gut. I had never asked for their gratitude, but I never imagined that after all the years I had been their daughter-in-law, after all the times I had helped with their medical bills and living expenses, after all the times I had held my tongue for the sake of family, in their eyes, I was so worthless I could simply be changed. Michael buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. For the first time since we were married, I saw him cry. Not loud sobs, but choked, quiet sounds of pure heartbreak. "I never thought my parents would become like this, Sarah. I thought they were just a little greedy, a little obsessed with appearances. I never thought they could talk about trading you like an object." I went to him and wrapped my arms around his shoulders. At that moment, I no longer blamed him. I understood that I wasn't the only one who had been betrayed. Michael had just been cast out by the very family he once considered his foundation. Before we could collect ourselves, a loud, frantic banging erupted at the front door. Michael shot to his feet, instinctively pulling me behind him. When he opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch. One held up a summons, his voice firm. "We need Mr. David and Mr. Kevin to come with us to assist in an investigation regarding the financial records of a Mr. Sterling." Helen rushed out of her room. The moment she heard her husband's and son's names, she collapsed onto the floor. "No, you can't. My husband, my son, they don't know anything. It's all a misunderstanding." But this time, no one believed her tears. Michael stood protectively in front of me, his hand gripping mine. I could feel that he was still in pain, still trembling, but he didn't back down. That was the first time I saw him truly break free from the toxic hold of his family. Not because he had stopped loving them, but because he understood that if he continued to protect them, we would both be dragged down with them. After David and Kevin were taken away for questioning, the already tense house devolved into chaos. At first, Helen stood frozen in the living room, her face drained of all color, her hands gripping the arm of a chair as if to keep from falling. But a few minutes later, when she saw a few curious neighbors peering through the front gate, her demeanor shifted entirely. Her panic morphed into a theatrical display of victimhood. She ran out onto the lawn, weeping and beating her chest. "Oh, my God, I'm an old woman, I didn't know anything. It was all Michael's business dealings with Mr. Sterling. Now that there's trouble, he's throwing his own father and brother under the bus. Why did I give birth to such a heartless son?" Her wails carried across the neighborhood. A few passers-by stopped, some whispering, others pulling out their phones. I watched from inside, a chill running through me. Just yesterday, she was embracing Chloe like a daughter. Just yesterday, she was forcing Michael to divorce me. But the moment Mr. Sterling's ship started to sink, she immediately turned her knives on her own son. I had heard stories of cruel in-laws, but it was only then that I understood some people would trample over their own flesh and blood to save themselves. Michael started to step outside to explain, but I grabbed his arm. He looked at me, his eyes red with a mix of anger and pain. I whispered, "Don't. She wants you to lose your temper. The more you argue, the more she can paint you as the disrespectful son." He gritted his teeth, his hand clenching so tightly the veins stood out, but he stayed put. Seeing Michael remain silent, Helen grew bolder. She pulled out her phone, called a relative, and deliberately put it on speaker. "Sister, my family is ruined. My daughter-in-law convinced Michael to report his own father. The police came and took him away. She wants to take the house, the shop, and kick our whole family out on the street." The person on the other end, not knowing the full story, exclaimed, "Oh my. That Sarah seems so sweet, but she's that vicious?" Helen immediately burst into sobs. "Sweet? She's hiding a knife behind her back." Within a single morning, the twisted version of the story spread rapidly. Some people texted me, asking if it was true I had sent my father-in-law to jail. Others hinted that a woman who was too clever becomes evil. Someone even sent me a screenshot of a post by Jessica. She had written a cryptic but vicious line. "The scariest woman is the one who hides behind her husband to destroy his family, then claims she was the victim." I read it and could only laugh. The same person who helped Kevin hide the ticket itinerary, who knew exactly how Chloe was shoehorned into the trip, was now playing the role of a moral bystander. I didn't comment, didn't argue, didn't post a single thing in my defense. I just quietly took screenshots of every post, every comment, every insulting message, every name, every word. Michael saw me and asked, "Are you going to sue them?" I replied, "No. I just don't want anyone to say we don't have proof later." That afternoon, Michael received a call from an investigator. He took it on the balcony, but the gravity in the officer's voice was audible enough for me to know something was wrong. When he came back inside, his face was pale. He said slowly, "My dad testified that I was the one who initiated the partnership with Mr. Sterling. He said he only co-signed a few documents because he trusted his son." I was stunned, but the blows kept coming. Michael sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Kevin confessed that I told him to book the ticket for Chloe. He said I wanted to bring her along to pave the way for a divorce, but then I changed my mind because you made a scene. His voice broke on the last few words. My own brother would say that about me? I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. I knew he wasn't just shocked at being framed. He was gutted by the betrayal of family, his own father, his own brother. The people he had tried to protect were now united in pushing him forward to take the fall. I squeezed his shoulder gently. "The more it hurts, the more clear-headed you have to be. They don't want you to prove your innocence. They want you to break down and carry their guilt." Michael looked up at me. Something in his eyes had both shattered and hardened. He didn't say anything, just gave a slight nod. That evening, just when I thought things had quieted down, I received a voice message on my phone from an unknown number. I played it. It was Chloe's voice, no longer soft, but cold and challenging. "You think Michael is so clean? Without me, he would have lost everything long ago. You may have kept the man, but are you sure you can keep the truth?" I listened to it twice. Michael, standing beside me, his face grim, said, "She's trying to bait us." I nodded. "Either that, or she has something she thinks can make us panic." I opened the USB drive Michael had given me and checked every folder again. At first, I only saw the files he had already shown me. But when I enabled the Show Hidden Files option, a small folder appeared at the bottom of the screen. Its name was just 2 words. Airport Plan. Michael and I looked at each other, my heart hammering in my chest. I moved the cursor and opened the folder. Inside wasn't a document or a photo. It was a video clip, saved from before the ticket fiasco. The first frame showed the living room of my in-laws' house. On the screen were Helen, David, Kevin, Jessica, and Chloe, all gathered around the coffee table. I hadn't even pressed play, but just seeing that image, I knew. The trap at the airport was no spontaneous act. It had been calculated, discussed, and arranged. And this video was likely the one thing that could make all of their lives crumble. I pressed play on the video. The laptop screen illuminated the living room of my in-laws' house, captured by a security camera in the hallway. The angle was slightly skewed, but it was clear enough to see every face. Helen was in the center, holding a piece of paper, likely the passenger list, and tapping her fingernail on it. Her voice was sharp and clear. Just remove Sarah's name. By the time we're at the airport, even if she's angry, she can't do anything. With so many people around, she won't dare make a scene. I thought I had already felt all the pain there was to feel, but hearing those words, my scalp tingled. They didn't just want me to miss the trip, they wanted me to stand in the middle of a crowded airport and be publicly shamed as an unwanted outsider. In the video, Kevin was looking down at his phone, typing quickly. "The ticket is rebooked," he said. "I have the receipts for the money Michael sent, but the passenger name has been changed to Chloe." When the check-in agent says her ticket doesn't exist, Sarah can't argue. Jessica let out a small, cruel laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "Make sure Sarah brings her passport," she added. The real impact is when she hands over her own documents only to be told her name isn't there. If we tell her at home, where's the fun in that? I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Woman to woman, how could she so calmly devise such a meticulous way to humiliate me? It was then that Chloe spoke, her voice soft but every word laced with poison. "I don't want to make things too difficult for Michael. As long as he walks through security with me, everyone will see who is by his side. After the trip, things will naturally fall into place." She lowered her head and smiled faintly, the smile of someone certain of victory. David nodded in agreement, his voice confident. Men are terrified of losing face in public. He won't dare cancel. On one side, he'll have his whole family. On the other, a wife who's been embarrassed. He'll choose to stay quiet to end the drama. Helen immediately added, "Michael is a good son. He wouldn't bear to see his parents lose face. As long as he agrees to go on this trip with Chloe, Sarah will lose so much dignity she'll have to let go on her own." Listening to them, my eyes stung, but strangely, no tears fell. Perhaps when pain reaches its absolute limit, you can no longer cry. I just felt a hollow emptiness inside, as if the last ounce of affection I had tried to preserve for them had been scooped out. Michael slammed his hand on the desk. The coffee cup beside it rattled, spilling liquid onto the surface. He gritted his teeth, his eyes bloodshot. "I knew they were cruel," he choked out, "but I never imagined they were this venomous." His voice broke on the last word. It wasn't just the anger of a husband. It was the utter devastation of a son witnessing his own parents, brother, and sister-in-law conspiring to destroy his wife. I said nothing. I rewound the video, saved a copy to a hard drive, uploaded another to cloud storage, and immediately emailed one to the lawyer Michael had contacted. I added a note. "This is proof they premeditated the airport incident. Please secure the original and advise on our next steps." Only after I hit send did I realize how cold my hands were. Just then, the bedroom door burst open. Helen charged in, likely intending to continue her tearful performance for Michael. But the moment she saw the laptop screen, frozen on the image of her holding the passenger list, her face went white. She froze for a second, then lunged forward like a madwoman, reaching to snatch the laptop. Michael was faster. He blocked her arm, his voice like ice. "What are you afraid of, Mom? You're just seeing the consequences of your own words." Helen looked at him, trembling. In an instant, her aggressive demeanor vanished, replaced by the pitiful expression of a wronged mother she always used to make her son relent. She grabbed Michael's arm, her voice cracking. "Michael, it was a mistake. I was desperate because of the debt. I listened to bad advice. You wouldn't send your own mother to jail, would you? I'm your mother." I looked at her and felt my heart, surprisingly, no longer ache. I just asked quietly, "When you left me standing in the middle of that airport, did you remember that I was a person, too?" Helen spun toward me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes that quickly morphed back into hatred. She let go of Michael and pointed a finger at my face. "This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, my son would be married into a rich family, and this house would have been saved. What more do you want?" Michael took a step back, as if her words had just severed the final thread connecting them. Seeing this, Helen dropped to her knees and clutched his legs. "Son, I'm begging you, don't take this further. Tell the lawyer not to send anything. If something happens to your father and Kevin, how will I live? Michael looked down at his mother for a long time. I could see his eyes were red, but this time, he didn't cry. He just slowly pulled his leg away from her grasp. From this day on, you haven't lost your son because of my wife. You've lost him because of your own greed. Helen collapsed onto the floor, sobbing silently. But her tears no longer moved me. Because I knew that if this video hadn't surfaced, the ones being blamed for destroying a trip, a family, and a home would have been Michael and me. They had left us no way out, so we could no longer blind ourselves and call it family. Less than an hour later, the lawyer called back, his voice serious. This video is a game changer. It not only proves the ticket swap was premeditated but also directly refutes the testimony that Michael arranged for Chloe to come along. I will immediately forward a copy to the investigators, following proper procedure. I put the phone down and looked at Michael. He stood by the window, his back straight but looking terribly lonely. I went to stand beside him. Outside, Helen was still crying on the floor. But inside, I felt a strange calm. That video couldn't erase the slap at the airport or the months of disrespect I had endured. But it had, at least, given me back one crucial thing, the truth. After the video from the airport plan folder was submitted by our lawyer, Chloe could no longer maintain the gentle, understanding facade she had so carefully constructed. When the mask falls, people often stop bothering with soft words. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. The moment I answered, Chloe's voice came through, as cold as a blade to the throat. You won one round. Don't think you've won the whole game. I paused, not out of fear, but to see how far she would take her act. What do you want? I asked. Chloe let out a soft, humorless laugh, full of venom. I want you to understand that people like you should never step into a world that isn't yours. Michael should have been mine a long time ago. Before I could reply, my phone buzzed. She had sent me a picture. It was a photo of me, taken that afternoon, standing outside Michael's shop, holding a file. It was shot from across the street, clearly by someone who had been following me. My blood ran cold. Chloe's voice continued, I know where you go, who you meet. Be careful. I hung up. Michael was right beside me. The moment he saw the picture, his expression hardened. He grabbed his car keys. Pack a bag. We're staying somewhere else tonight. I stopped him. No. If we run now, we're admitting we're scared. I don't need you to be brave, I need you to be safe. He snapped, one of the rare times he had ever raised his voice at me. I looked at him and said slowly, I'll be careful. But if she's trying to scare us into making a mistake, the last thing we should do is run. That night, my online Etsy shop started having problems. It began with a few one-star reviews. Then, within an hour, dozens of fake comments flooded the page, all with the same accusations. Scammer, took money and never shipped. Low-quality product, blocked me when I complained. One account even took my personal photos, photoshopped them with vulgar text, and posted them in various online marketplace groups. I sat in front of the screen as each new comment felt like a fresh slap. Near midnight, a fake profile published a long post accusing me of having an affair with one of my husband's employees and then fabricating the story of my in-laws forcing a divorce in order to seize their assets. The post was shared with unnatural speed. Watching the engagement metrics, I knew this wasn't organic. Someone was paying to boost the post, with pre-written content and a network of troll accounts ready to pile on. Chloe was no longer fighting with tears, she was fighting with money. Michael was so furious he wanted to call her immediately, but I stopped him. I just kept taking screenshots, saving links, and noting the times. She wants us to lose our cool, I said. Don't give her what she wants. He stood behind me, his voice choked with emotion. I'm so sorry. You've been dragged into this because of me. I didn't turn around. It's not because of you. It's because they thought I was an easy target. The ugliest blow came the next morning. A new customer placed an unusually large order from my shop, requesting same-day rush delivery. Being cautious, I documented everything. I saved the confirmation messages, took photos of the packaged items, and kept the shipping receipt. A few hours later, I received a call from someone claiming to be an investigator from the State Department of Consumer Affairs. He said they had received a complaint that I was selling goods of unknown origin and in large quantities without proper documentation. I invited him to my home office to conduct his inspection. When he arrived, I presented all my bookkeeping, purchase invoices, tracking numbers, and order messages. The investigator reviewed everything and simply advised me to file a few supplementary forms, noting there were no major issues. But I knew this wasn't a random audit. This was Chloe's warning. She could interfere with my livelihood whenever she wanted. That afternoon, Michael couldn't take it anymore. He called Chloe and put her on speaker for me to hear. She answered after 3 rings, her voice arrogant. "Michael. You finally decided to call me." Michael spoke slowly and deliberately. "You can come after me. But if you touch my wife again, don't expect me to be civil." Chloe scoffed. "When have you ever been civil to me? I loved you for 10 years, and all she has to do is shed a few tears for you to jump to her defense. What does she have that I don't?" Michael replied, "You lose because you see love as a possession." The line was silent for a moment. Then Chloe burst into laughter, a sound as sharp and brittle as shattering glass. "You still think you're so righteous, don't you? Do you think your father only owed my father money? He also signed away shares of your company." Michael and I both froze. "What did you just say?" he demanded. Chloe seemed to relish her victory. "Go ask your father and your dear brother. 35% of your shop's shares were transferred to one of my father's shell corporations. Your signature on the document was quite elegant. Don't you remember?" Michael hung up and stormed into his office. He tore through the filing cabinet, pulling out all the company's legal documents. I had never seen him so frantic. Finally, in a misfiled email from Kevin, he found a scanned copy of the share transfer agreement. His face went white. The signature bore his name. But a closer look revealed that the final stroke was stiff and unnatural, unlike his usual fluid signature. "It's forged," I whispered. Michael collapsed into his chair, his eyes fixed on the screen. 35% wasn't just a number. If that document was legitimized, he could lose control of his own company and be implicated in Mr. Sterling's shady dealings. If the Shell Corporation came under investigation, his name on a forged document would be enough to create a legal nightmare. He shot to his feet, ready to confront his father and brother. I grabbed his arm, my voice firmer than ever. "No. If you go now, they'll claim you're intimidating a witness. We need to get the signature authenticated, pull the email server logs, and back up every file." Michael looked at me, his eyes red with pain. He thought he was saving his parents, but they had been pushing him off a cliff all along. I didn't know how to comfort him. Some wounds are only made worse by words. I just squeezed his hand and said, "Then we climb out. But we climb with evidence, not with anger." That night, we gathered every piece of paper, every scan, every email, text message, and bank statement, including the posts defaming my shop, and drove to the lawyer's office. The city was quiet and cold, the streetlights smearing across the windshield in long, weary streaks. Michael drove slowly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When we pulled up in front of the law firm, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my heart clenched. A black sedan had been following us since we left our neighborhood. It kept its distance, its headlights dim, but it was there. I looked at Michael. He had seen it too. Neither of us said a word, but we both understood. Chloe wasn't just making threats anymore. She was escalating things to a more dangerous level. The black sedan remained parked across the street as we entered the law firm. Through the revolving glass door, I could see it sitting silently under the trees, its lights now off, but the feeling of being watched clung to me. Michael placed a hand on my back and said in a low voice, "Just walk straight. Don't look back." I nodded, clutching the portfolio of evidence to my chest. Inside was everything that could either save us or drag a group of people, hiding behind their money, into the light. Our lawyer, Mr. Jensen, was a man in his late 40s, sharp-eyed and deliberate. As we laid out all the evidence, he didn't rush to conclusions. He opened every file, watched the airport video, listened to the recording of Mr. Sterling and David, and examined the forged share transfer. The only sounds in the room were the clicking of a mouse, the rustle of paper, and Michael's heavy breathing. After nearly half an hour, Mr. Jensen took off his glasses. "This is no longer a family matter," he said, his voice firm. "We have evidence of multiple potential crimes here: fraud, forgery, defamation, and coercion." Michael was silent for a long moment before asking, "What if the ones who did this are my father and my brother?" Mr. Jensen didn't flinch. "The law doesn't distinguish between family and strangers. But you need to prepare yourself. When people's interests are threatened, family can turn on you faster than anyone." Just as Mr. Jensen was having his assistant make copies, the sharp, hurried click of high heels echoed from the hallway. The door was pushed open, and Chloe strode in. She was flanked by 2 men, but her eyes, stripped of their former confidence, were now wild and desperate. She ignored the lawyer and Michael, walked straight up to me, and threw a thick envelope on the table. "Sarah," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Take the money and get out of Michael's life. How much do you want? 1 million? 2? Name your price." I looked at the envelope, then at her. Strangely, I felt no humiliation, only pity. Here was a person with so much money, she thought everything had a price, yet so poor she couldn't understand the meaning of self-respect. I pushed the envelope back toward her. I don't sell my husband, I said slowly. You may be used to buying people, but not everyone is for sale. Chloe's face contorted. Don't play saint with me. Do you know how much money I've spent winning over his family? His mother, his father, his brother, even that useless sister-in-law, they all took my money. I've come too far to lose now. Mr. Jensen sat quietly, but I saw his finger discreetly press a button on his desk. A small red light on the security camera in the corner of the room was on. Everything she said was being recorded. Michael stood up, his calmness making the room feel even heavier. He looked at Chloe with an expression of pure disgust. You don't love me, he said. You just can't stand that I chose someone who isn't as rich as you. Chloe let out a sharp, brittle laugh. You're right, I can't stand it. What does she have that I don't? I have money, I have my father's backing, I can give you everything. And what does she have besides her pathetic morals? She stepped closer, hissing. And yes, I told my father to call in your family's debt. If I didn't push you to the brink, would you have ever even looked at me? The room fell silent. Her admission hung in the air, a confession that she had actively used debt and family pressure to try to tear us apart. Just then, the door opened again. This time, it was 2 investigators. Mr. Jensen stood up calmly. Gentlemen, you're just in time. We have a live confession. Chloe spun around, her face ashen. The 2 men she had brought with her began to back away. One of them spoke, his voice flat. Miss Sterling, we were also asked to cooperate regarding the funds you transferred to the network of fake accounts that were slandering Mrs. Sarah. Chloe stared at him in disbelief. The safety net she had woven with money had just snapped shut on her. As if on cue, Michael's phone rang. It was Kevin. Michael put it on speaker. His brother's panicked sobs filled the room. Michael, help me. They found out about the signature. I didn't mean for it to get this big. Dad told me to do it. Mom knew too. I just signed it, I didn't think. Michael closed his eyes. I knew he was in pain, but he didn't waver. He said one thing, his voice chillingly calm. When you took the money to sell out your own brother, did you remember I was family? The line went silent, save for a choked sob. Michael hung up. But the final twist came from the least expected source. Mr. Jensen's assistant came in and announced that a woman named Jessica was outside, asking to submit some documents. A moment later, Jessica walked in, looking pale and disheveled. She clutched a brown portfolio, avoiding my eyes. She bowed her head. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she whispered. I'm just trying to save myself. She placed the portfolio on the table. Inside were the original text message chains between her and Kevin, bank statements, and photos of Helen accepting cash from Chloe, a total of nearly $50,000 in gifts and payments, all to orchestrate the airport incident and force our divorce. Chloe sat frozen in her chair. Michael stood beside me, his hand clenched so tightly it trembled. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt that I didn't need to say another word. The truth had finally stood up and slapped them all harder than I ever could. After that night at the lawyer's office, the situation escalated beyond a private family dispute. The files, recordings, videos, and signature analysis were officially entered into the investigation. David, Kevin, and Chloe were questioned multiple times in connection with forgery, fraudulent share transfers, defamation, and coercion. Mr. Sterling, who had once stood before us with such arrogance, found his own financial crimes case expanding, his shell corporation's assets frozen. Helen wasn't taken into custody like her husband and son, but she was summoned for questioning repeatedly. Each time she returned, she seemed to have aged years. The woman who had once arrogantly dismissed me at the airport now moved about the house like a ghost, the gray in her unkempt hair more prominent than ever. The relatives who had sent me accusatory texts went silent. Jessica filed for legal separation from Kevin, submitting her evidence to minimize her own culpability. I didn't know if she felt true remorse or was just acting out of self-preservation, but in the end, she chose to tell the truth. The house my in-laws were so proud of was placed under a temporary lien due to the debt and its connection to Mr. Sterling's illicit dealings. The home Helen had hoped would be her ticket to a new social class now sat empty, with cold legal notices taped to the door. One afternoon, Helen called Michael. I sat beside him as her voice came through the phone, hoarse from crying. Son, I was wrong. Please, save your father and your brother. I can't bear this anymore. Michael was silent for a long time. I saw his hand, resting on his knee, tremble slightly. No matter what, she was still his mother. But finally, he spoke. His voice low and steady. "I won't let you starve, Mom. But I can't save anyone from the consequences of their own actions." When he said that, I knew it hurt him to draw that line with his own family. But he understood that being a good person sometimes means letting people face the repercussions of their mistakes. A few days later, Helen asked to see me. I agreed, not to forgive her or to hear more tears, but to find closure. We met at a small, quiet cafe. She had lost weight, and her hands, now bare of the flashy gold bracelets she used to wear, were clasped tightly on the table. She looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted a better future for my son." I looked at her for a long time. I had once longed to hear a sincere apology from her, but now that the moment was here, I felt surprisingly calm. "You didn't want a better future for him," I said softly. "You wanted to sell his future to buy a new life for yourself." Helen bowed her head. And a tear fell onto her hand. For the first time, she didn't argue or blame me. Michael officially disentangled his business from all of his family's fraudulent debts and transactions. Proving the forgery was a difficult process, but with our evidence, the company survived, albeit smaller. We lost some contracts, some partners grew distant. But our most loyal employees stayed. I sold off some of my own inventory to help Michael make payroll. We had to scale back, but what was left was ours. And it was clean. A month later, we heard that Chloe had been barred from leaving the country, pending the investigation. She sent Michael one last text message. "If you had chosen me that day, everything would have been different." Michael read it and deleted it without replying. He turned to me and said, "It would be different. I would have lost you, and I would have lost myself." I didn't say anything. I just took his hand. That hand had trembled with pain and clenched in anger. It had shielded me in a crowded airport. And it was the one I wanted to hold as we walked forward, even if the road ahead was no longer smooth. Sometimes, I still think about that morning at the airport. I remember Helen's cold voice saying, "You can go home now. There's no ticket for you." At the time, I thought I was being cast out of a vacation. But it turns out, that was the moment that showed me who was willing to leave me behind, and who was willing to turn his back on the entire world to stand by my side. Some cancelled flights aren't a loss. Sometimes, they're just the universe's way of keeping you from getting on the wrong journey.